Okay, so my name's Erin Penuela. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for having me. I've been a research associate with Edmonds Community College Anthropology Department for this past year, but my other full-time job is I'm a grad student at the University of Washington in the School of Marine and Environmental Affairs and the Evans School of Governance and Public Policy. They just changed their name. This project was really hot off the press. This is the first time that we're sharing some of the findings that you have. It's currently in review process, but essentially what we were charged with, the anthropology department with Edmonds Community College, was contracted through Puget Sound Partnership, through a grant through the Environmental Protection Agency, to look at what were the barriers that counties and cities within the 12-county region of Puget Sound were having to implementing green infrastructure. And not just what were the barriers, but also what are the patterns to the barriers across the region, and what are the variations between cities versus counties, small, medium, large, and also different perceived barriers depending on the staff themselves. So whether it's line staff, middle management, or executive staff, or planners versus engineers, they have very different outlooks. So that's what the project was. Here was our project team. The PI was Tom Murphy. He's the chair of the Anth department at the community college. The Learn and Serve Environmental Anthropology Field School, it's a mouthful, but it is a highly engaged interactive program at the community college level that uses community participatory research to create more sustainable society, and we work with tribes, with cities, with counties, with the state, with nonprofits, and have been for over 10 years now. And then you can see we have a number of research assistants, and Darren Molnar was our statistician. So we've been hearing over the past few days a lot of talk about this change from a conversation about mitigation to one that's really looking to adaptation. The climate assessment in 2013 wrote, planning for adaptation mitigation is becoming more widespread, but current implementation efforts are insufficient to avoid increasingly negative social, environmental, and economic consequences. Here is a photo from Como 4 News in Snohomish from 2009 and a massive flooding event. And so what this project really aims to do is look at what are some of the barriers to these implementation efforts, and in particular with municipalities, really the boots on the ground group of folks that are really trying to make some changes. The area of focus is quite formidable here, especially when you look at the 12 different counties. You have a lot of variation from, do I have a, hold on a second. Oh, there we go. So what you're going to get up here is going to be really different than what you're going to get up here in an urban big city with a lot of resources like something like Seattle versus something like Index. Very different places, very different types of resources, very different size of municipalities themselves. So we had a lot on our plate. We started in February of 2015 and wrapped up this August. So as we know, we've been hearing all about the climate change projections, increased risk of flooding, sea level rise, saltwater inundation, extreme heat events, precipitation intensities. These are things that we've heard already, so I'm not going to spend too much time on here, but these are all particular to the region that I just went over the project with there. So green infrastructure. Green infrastructure is really a holistic set of tools and planning that go much further than just rain gardens and planter boxes that you see here. Green infrastructure, it also kind of encompasses this low impact development, which is now part of policy within this region through the National Pollutant and Elimination Discharge System permits, NPDES permits, as well as through the shoreline master plans. But what you see here is here are some examples of green infrastructure. So we have soft shore armoring, rain gardens, bioswales, pervious concrete, green roofs reduce heat island effect, land conservation and floodplain restoration to deal with more flooding events, rainwater harvesting. So really the idea is to mimic the natural hydrology of an area and work with pre-construction or pre-development areas to manage stormwater, for example, on site, to conserve water where it lands. And a lot of these different tools and strategies work with that. So here were our research questions that Puget Sound Partnership gave us to work on for 4 months. What are the perceptions? Again, this was an anthropological study, so we're really looking from the social side of things, and here we demonstrate just the value that the social sciences do have in adapting, mitigating, and responding to things like climate change. So what are the perceptions of barriers within municipalities to implementation of LID standards, municipal operations, including right-of-way management or ROW management, perceptions of barriers to the Municipal Shoreline Master Program implementation, and barriers to comprehensive approaches to green infrastructure? Where in municipal operations do potential projects encounter barriers? Are there hot spots that really restrict this type of implementation? What internal changes might remove those barriers? What external support could remove those barriers? And how do the perceptions of barriers compare and contrast between cities and counties, large, mid-sized, and small jurisdictions, urban and rural jurisdictions, and stormwater permittees and non-permittees? So it was a formidable task. And how do perceptions vary between executive staff, middle managers, and line staff? So I'm going to try to go quickly through some of these findings. I will show, there's a link to the report when it does get finished after the peer review. That's 300 pages if you have some extra time. Okay, so real quick, what do I mean when I say municipal organization? Here's just a quick example of an organizational municipal flow chart, where you have the mayor and the executive, and then you have a number of different departments, including public works, community planning and development. You can have parks, there's operations and maintenance, and all of these look a little bit different depending on what municipality you're in, and depending on also which size. So here's just an example of one that was written, and then as part of our study, one aspect of the study was conducting interviews, 54 in-depth interviews, and part of that interview process, we implemented something that I like to call a cognitive concept map, where our interviewees were asked to draw out, without any guidance from us, what their municipality looked like, where were barriers, hotspots of barriers to implement this type of policy, as well as the effectiveness of communication within departments. So you can see as an example, the red would be terrible communication. This particular interviewee included the public on there, and you can see how they're conceptually visualizing their own municipality and how it's organized and how it works. Okay, so this is part of rapid ethnography. This is like the prime how anthropologists study. So we did a document analysis. The document analysis was primarily all of the MPDES reports that were going to the Department of Ecology in 2010, and they were reporting on what the difficulties they were having for implementing the MPDES stormwater permit. We used participant observation, where over the past 10 years we've been forming relationships with a number of the municipalities and regions that we were going to be studying. And then we also attended 13 LID workshops that were put on by Cascadia as well as Herrera Environmental. And this was a great location where you can hear what engineers, what geotechs were actually facing in a comfortable environment for them. And so we took extensive notes in that regard. We did semi-structured interviews, 54, and those semi-structured interviews were through 9 different case studies. So we tried to cover a depth and the extent of the different types of municipalities that we were looking at. So from small rural non-permittees to large phase 1 permittees and counties. We also included the cognitive concept mapping, which I just showed you, and then the depth of the information that was coming out of the interviews informed an online survey that we blanketed throughout the region, and this was targeting municipal staff employees. So it was not elected officials nor the public or contractors. So here you see just some of their, I mean, there's a lot more pie graphs on the report, but for the interviews, we had, oh, I have 5 minutes. I'm going to zip right through this. City and county differences, this was the survey. And then we went through physical and technical barriers. I wanted to include a lot of what people were saying in the interview, because you really get an understanding of what staff employees, what their perspective was on some of these barriers. The number one physical and technical barrier that came out of the interviews was soil suitability. That's something that's hard for us to make changes with, but the other thing that came out that was just as high was high maintenance and the difficulty to maintain some of these new infrastructures and technologies and the lack of know-how in order to do it. For example, with a lot of leaves on the ground, if you're putting pervious concrete down and those leaves get through into the pervious concrete, it's very hard to clean that out, especially if you don't have the capacity like a specific type of vac system. Physical and technical solutions that were brought out. This is a quote: "I think a dedicated team for LID that goes beyond design and planning and gets into maintenance and inspection is needed to make LID successful over time." Again, the top solution here is evaluate site by site. There was not a lot of input on types of solutions, so you can see it's pretty low there. Legal and regulatory barriers. A lot came out of the interview with conflicting codes and regulations and a slow and cumbersome permitting process, as well as code enforcement came out quite a bit. Another thing here was that this is lower on the priorities for counties and cities when you're faced with things like safety issues. So I remember one interviewee was saying, "I'm not going to put my maintenance crew on a green roof because of the safety issues that relate to that." Legal and regulatory solutions, rewrite codes and regulations. That's what they say is a solution, but we'll see again that's also a barrier through financial barrier with having the money and the staff time in order to do that. Financial barriers. A lot of the new technologies with this, there's a lot of unknowns, and so like this quote is great. "Well, now you've just increased the cost of a project because 1, you're going to be doing the pervious pavement, and 2, you're also going to have to be doing a traditional conveyance system in case it fails. So you're doubling up on those costs because of this uncertainty with how long the infrastructure will hold, and will it do what it needs to do over time." Financial solutions. I mean, through the interviews, number one was grants for green infrastructure. That might just be because they knew that we were interviewing on behalf of Puget Sound Partnership, and but in the MPDS reports, it was cost and performance analysis. Community and institutional barriers. This was one that was particularly interesting to me as a social scientist, but right up here with the cognitive maps, we looked at them and said, where were employees circling the hot spot? Where was the hardest communication and where were things getting hung up? And the number of visualizations on the maps where the location of concentrated barriers were with elected officials. There's no surprise there to me. But also, just under that was city manager and administration. So really a leadership, or a lot across the board with this, a lack of leadership and priority from upper management. Here's number of interviews, lack of public demand, need for more staff training, and internal resistance. And then community and institutional solutions. Really, both interviews and reports cited public education, as well as a number of other things. I'm going to zip right by there. Now here for the survey was blanketed across the region. This was really going to identify the patterns that were associated within this 12-county region, and not the depth of the issues that the interviews were. The top 5 for barriers were: 1, difficult for public agencies to ensure proper maintenance is occurring on private property. Maintenance and durability, and the risks associated and uncertainties associated with that. This is also, there are a lot of different instances, and it seemed like there's a lot of, in the press, there's a lot of talk about the things that fail, and not as much about the things that are working well. And so I think when looking at maintenance and durability, the initial response is hesitation because of a lot of the press that these ones that don't work out as well get. Uncertainties in performance and costs, again, that's kind of a scale issue, a temporal scale. How long will it take for us to recoup certain costs that we have to put in initially? Legacy infrastructure that does not comply with present standards. And then the fifth is project cost. Top fives for survey solutions, internal solutions, consider stormwater design at the outset of a project, incentives for retrofits of existing infrastructure. The third, using LID designs that do not require infiltration on unsuitable soils. The fourth is maps showing soil suitability for various LID techniques. And the third, bringing staff together to address communication challenges. That's actually surprised me that was within the top five, because there was a number, there were, I think, over 25 or a lot of different options. So for that to come up as a communication and institutional barrier was surprising to me. And then for the external solutions, grants. And on grants for green infrastructure, another thing was pilot projects. Pilot projects seem to do really well to the public, and also just to catalyze excitement and the second, holding developers accountable for environmental damage. The third was lifetime maintenance cost and performance analysis. This is something that I think is continuing to come about over time, and seeing what the costs and the performance is of these different infrastructures, but more work there could certainly be done. Grants for increasing staff, and more regulatory flexibility when green infrastructure would meet the spirit but not the letter of the law. Key takeaways on these, I'm not going over what the differences are between cities and counties because we just don't have the time here to do it, but there were some statistically relevant differences between executive, line, and middle management, as well as public works and community development and planning. Those two were kind of the two major areas within a municipality that deals with this type of infrastructure. But the key takeaways here: uncertainties in cost and performance, legacy infrastructure and the suitability of some soils for infiltration are reported barriers, and then again, maintenance was a big one. We interviewed a number of different maintenance teams as well, saying all of a sudden you're changing the know-how of the maintenance team, the tools that are being used in a rain garden, what's a weed, what's not a weed, what to pull, how much time goes into that, so labor costs as well. This was a big hot spot across the board. Again, conflicting priorities. It seems that physical, technical, legal, and regulatory barriers are starting to diminish over time, and that we're seeing more financial, community, and institutional barriers rising now that these implementations are beginning. And some of the solutions that we saw come out of the project was a reduction of risk and uncertainty with these newer technologies, cost, benefit, and performance analyses, making developers responsible for environmental damage, and better enforcement. So again, what now is looking at how can we use some of the findings on this to develop a more comprehensive, or for Puget Sound Partnership and everyone else working on this, to target some of these barriers that we see coming out of these out of the project. I really think maintenance is a major issue, and getting a plan together. The report will be out soon, like I said. My name and email are there. The PI, Tom Murphy, is there. He would have loved to be here, but I think he's probably knee-deep in Japanese and Big Gulch and Mukilteo with students monitoring salmon recovery today. But he would have been here if he could. So thank you very much. And okay, yes.
This is not exactly types what's related. You're at a community college?
I was a research associate there. I'm a grad student at the University of Washington.
Okay. I was just curious, at the community college, are they implementing any of these kinds of things?
Edmonds is. I worked there for about 4 or 5 years in a number of different capacities, and I mean, the grounds department is using, I guess they're using less pesticides and things like that, but in terms of rain gardens, yeah, we are. Yeah.
vehicles like
Yeah.
solar and
Yeah, so we have our community college, or Edmonds Community College, has actually a number of rain gardens, and we have a community garden out and back that also has a food rain garden, an edible rain garden. It's more looks like it's beginning as a pilot, and you don't see it implemented around the campus as a whole. But we also have a number of different efforts, like a cultural kitchen, like I said, the food, traditional food, things like that. But I can't say for other community colleges. Yeah.
So you mentioned that maintenance was a large perceived barrier. Do you know, is the actuality as bad as is perceived?
Right, I think that's a really good question just across the board on a lot of these, because I mean we didn't look for that, but there certainly were incapacities, so just lack of resources, lack of staff to maintain. And speaking of the maintenance, the knowledge and the training that the maintenance crews would need to take care of something like a green roof, or have their mowers cut differently because of the way the right-of-way was shaped, or all sorts of things like that. And it does seem like that there truly is that lack of capacity in that way. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you get any feedback back on potential ways to incent private developers to use more green infrastructure? It seems like it's easier to get them with the carrot than the stick.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of discussion about carrot versus stick, and that there needs to be a little bit of both. From a private developer side, you know, what's interesting is that there was one area that, one case study where the city was rural, it was surrounded by more rural areas, and they were a permittee, and the permittees are required to implement LID where feasible, right? And so they were pushing that on the developers, and the developer said, well, hey, it's just going to be less expensive for me to go outside of the city boundaries and develop right across the way over here. And so we do notice that is going on, so there does need to be better incentives. Off the top of my head right now, I know that there was a little bit of discussion with that, but I can't think of one specific. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I was curious. I missed the beginning of that, so apologies.
No.
Go ahead.
That's okay.
So I was wondering if there were any parts of the conversation or the interviews that addressed their concerns about how climate change may impact.
You know, it wasn't framed from a climate change perspective. The whole project wasn't. But it has serious implications, and it directly relates to climate change. And a lot of it was looking at, in the interviews, they revolved around the current policy of LID. They're also semi-structured, so things that would come out would just come out. Very little, and again, I don't have like the coding on here, but I personally performed the majority of the interviews, or at least half. Tom and I did, and I can safely say that climate change was not on in a lot of the discussions. Yeah.
One last question? Choose.
I was wondering if there was any indication of that cost-benefit difference in infrastructures in terms of their effectiveness.
There are. One of the big barriers was for city employees not having access to that information. I think that there are performance analyses and cost benefits, but because of the newness and there's not as long term. Not that we found, and not that a lot of the cities found. So I think that's an area where there could be a lot of work done in getting that information to cities and counties. Right? Thank you.
Very much. And